A journalist is arrested along with a notorious criminal mafia gang and charged with the murder of a fellow journalist. But did she actually commit the crime or did the state frame her? Let's find out today in the story of Jyotirmoy Dey. Hi, welcome to Collectively Vigilant. I'm Dr. D.
And I'm Sam.
The story I'm going to tell you today is about a journalist who was arrested along with a notorious criminal mafia gang. You might be familiar with a guy called Chota Rajan. Have you ever heard of it?
Yes, I have.
You have, right? Okay, so the Chota Rajan gang, along with Chota Rajan and a crime journalist, was actually she was arrested for committing a crime. But our story today is going to be whether she's actually the person who committed that crime or was she framed by the state. So let's find out today in the murder of Jyotirmoy Dey. This crime story happened in 2011. So by the way, do you recall watching the news back in 2011 and do you remember this crime?
I don't.
You don't. By the way, neither did I.
Yeah.
But apparently, recently there's been a web series made about this crime, and the web series is called Scoop. But because both of us do not live in India and we do not have access to those things, so we have definitely not seen it. I haven't. Have you?
No. It's not on Netflix, Disney.
It's not. It's neither on Netflix nor on Disney, so both of us have not seen it. Yeah. Okay, so unfortunately, the story is manifold. It has many victims, right? But I'm going to start the story with the person who actually lost his life. So literally the person who lost his life, and later on we will move to collateral damage, where people, of course, lost sleep and time and days of their lives, months, years of their life, metaphorically, right? So we will. So let me start with the actual victim of the crime. So in this case, the victim who was murdered was a famous crime journalist called Jyotirmoy Dey, and he was born in 1955. Now, the interesting thing is, by the way, I looked at pictures of him, and he was exceedingly handsome, and he was, by the way, 6'3", which is a towering figure anywhere, but especially in India, right? Jyotirmoy Dey started his career with the Hindustan Times. He was a wildlife enthusiast. He did not start out as a journalist. He began writing about forest encroachment and animal and man conflict, especially in the Borivali National Park. A story about governmental departments taking over, and then later on he wrote many things about how people encroach upon reserved national forests, and this created a lot of furor in the state legislature as well. He started his journalistic career as a freelancer with the Afternoon Dispatch and Courier. These are not newspapers we're familiar with.
Right.
We knew about the Hindustan Times because that's everywhere in India. But I think these Afternoon Dispatch and Courier are probably more regional newspapers, maybe in Maharashtra. A place that unfortunately I've never been to. Have you ever been to Mumbai?
No, but I've heard a lot about it.
Right.
We should make plans to visit.
Yes. Okay. So he started freelancing, as I said, and then later on he joined full time with the Indian Express in 1996. And he's very soon after joining the Indian Express, he actually switched to covering crime, especially those about the Mumbai underworld. Now, do you remember anything about the Mumbai underworld in the 1990s? So all of us remember that there were these bomb blasts in the 1990s time and time again. Do you remember there used to be a guy called Sanjay Dutt?
Oh, yes.
So, like, there was a lot of criminal activity back in the 1990s. And by the way, this makes me look like I'm the older one, but actually she's the older one and she just doesn't remember about the 1990s. Okay. So in 2005, he joins the Hindustan Times, and he later rejoined Midday. So as you can tell, that the guy was very sought after. So he joining one thing after another, and he was also married to Shubha Sharma Dey, and she's also apparently a journalist. And he was quite famous as a crime journalist, and he ended up writing great stories in different newspapers. And he also wrote 2 books about the underworld activities. One is called Zero Dial, The Dangerous World of Informers, and another book called Khalas. Now, for all of those who don't know, what's the meaning of the word Khalas, by the way?
Shoot somebody.
To shoot somebody, or like to execute someone.
Yeah.
Okay, so he was writing about all these people. He was writing about Dawood Ibrahim. He was writing about Chota Rajan. So he was basically like in the thick of things, right? So unfortunately, on June 11 of 2011, this journalist that I've been talking about, his name is Jyotirmoy Dey. He was 56 years old when he was shot dead near Hiranandi Gardens, which is in the suburb of Powai. Again, both of us are not familiar with Mumbai, but this is in the suburbs of Mumbai. Apparently, there's a place called Powai, right? This man is shot dead on June 11th, and then of course the news is abuzz. People are talking about it all over. He was such a famous journalist that everyone was covering it. And I mean, it is a rare thing for a journalist to be shot dead like this in a city like Mumbai. Of course, journalists are killed all over the world when they, cover controversial things. Yeah. But then this man was, of course, this journalist, very famous. So he dies on June 11, and on June 27, the Mumbai Crime Branch arrested 7 people in connection to his murder. And then this is where our second victim comes in. On November 25th, so after a few months after the initial arrest, there was a journalist called Jigna Vora who was arrested on charges of instigating the killing of the journalist Jyotirmoy Dey. And it was said by the police and in the initial charge sheet that she had instigated and she had conspired to kill Jyotirmoy Dey with the Chota Rajan gang. Okay, so that's the interesting part. Now, because I've mentioned Jigna Vora, let me now start by telling you something about her. Now, let's start from the beginning and dive deep into the life of the woman whose name I just mentioned a few seconds ago. Her name is Jigna Vora. Now, for all those who might not be familiar with Indian names, what can you tell just by listening to the name Jigna?
Jigna is a Gujarati name, very famous Gujarati name.
Yeah, so it sounds very Gujarati.
Yeah,
and
very
she's
Gujarati.
right, it is absolutely Gujarati. So Jigna was born in a well-to-do family in the year 1974. She was actually born in Maharashtra. By the way, again, both of us are not familiar with Maharashtra at all, but Mumbai especially is one of those melting pots of India one has heard so much about. And you and I come from the other melting pot of India, which is
Delhi.
Okay, New Delhi. So Jigna was apparently born to a father who was more or less always living in Dubai. And as a matter of fact, in the 1970s, her dad was well to do enough to be driving a Mercedes Benz. And Jigna grew up in Mumbai and then later studied law at the Ruparel College. So she finished her LLB. And right after finishing her LLB, she was married on December 4th of 1998 to a man who was selected by her parents who lived in Gujarat. So after getting married, she moved from Mumbai to Gujarat. And apparently, her parents knew this person as an engineer, and he apparently even owned his own printing press, or so Jigna was told. The marriage was rather lavish, as all Indian weddings are. Jigna's father worked in Dubai, so he was able to give a lot of things to the groom side of the family as dowry. They even gave 100 tolas of gold, which roughly comes to 1,166 grams of gold. However, her marital bliss was short lived. She realized that the person that she was married to was apparently the renowned alcoholic of that street and of that city. And on top of that, there was no way this man could be an engineer because Jigna, she was cleaning up her house one day and she found the 10th grade mark sheet of her husband, and apparently he had failed grade 10. So
But I'm surprised, how did the family not get the background check done? This is really strange.
I can't say, but I can tell you that people are very good at lying. So, and maybe they were under the assumption that these people will not lie, because when people are getting married, they're usually not known to lie so much that it will be completely different. But I'm not sure. Anyway, so this man had failed grade 10. So that was the one strike against him. He had lied. He was not even an engineer, but they did have a family business. Apparently, later on in her life, just a few days later, she comes to know that her husband is a control freak, and so is his entire family. She faced more hardship after her firstborn baby girl died of septicemia within months of that child's birth. So apparently, the child was less than 2 months old when she died. So in the year 2000, Jigna gives birth to a boy. Um, and when this boy turned 4, so that would be 2004, the father was so abusive, and everyone in her marital house was so abusive towards her. They spoke so ill of each other that the child was started emulating the way the father spoke. And one day he tells his mother, quote, "Get out of my house," unquote. This was when she finally decided that she needs to divorce this alcoholic husband. And after years of being a homemaker, at the age of 30, she was a single mother and she wanted to join the workforce. And that's when she started taking evening classes at Somaiya College back she moves back to her family in Maharashtra. And then she started doing a diploma in journalism. One of her faculty members was a crime reporter called Veli Tevar. Now, just by listening to that name, by the way, I was so confused. I couldn't even tell if it's a male name or a female name. That was my first confusion. And second one was what part of India do you think this person hails from?
Southern part, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So Veli, by the way, if you can't tell, because I definitely couldn't, is I looked it up. She's a female crime journalist and apparently a very famous one. So being a student at that time at Somaiya College, Jigna started working for the Free Press Journal. At that time, her salary was 3,000 rupees back in 2005, which you're smiling because you can relate to.
Yes, I can.
Right? Because salaries back then were abysmal. So within 10 months of starting as a journalist, her salary doubled and it was 7,500 rupees due to her excellent performance. And then at this time, she was, by the way, still taking evening classes. And she later on started working on hundreds of different cases. She wrote very interesting stories for the Mumbai Mirror and many other important newspapers like the Asian Age. So, but the biggest shock in the story is that the same journalist, by the time she was 37 years old, so 7 years into being a journalist, she was actually arrested, and the police claimed that she had conspired with Chota Rajan, and that was the reason why Jyotirmoy Dey was killed. So the case against Jigna was based on what the police and the prosecution claimed were 36 damning transcripts, where Jigna was probably instigating, according to the prosecution, instigating Chota Rajan to kill Jyotirmoy Dey. So this case was heard over 7 years, and now I'm going to get you into details of those 7 years. And all this comes from Jigna's book, which is called Escape from Baikala. So Jigna was arrested on November 25th of 2011, and then she was sent into judicial remand on December 9th of 2011. She goes into a lot of details about this in her book. It apparently, even before she was arrested, because she's a journalist, she was hearing all these rumors all along. And her immediate boss is actually a very famous journalist called Zaidi Sir, Zaidi, Zaidi, and he apparently was with her. He was trying to comfort her, and she tried to actually figure out whether she was actually being arrested or not. There were rumors afloat. She was finally arrested. It was a shock for her family. She goes into details that her son at this time was studying in a school in Panchgani, and she was living with her parents and her grandparents, and everybody in the family. She was arrested quite early in the morning, so all the women were taking a bath at that time, and she was arrested initially when she was wearing jeans and a pink t-shirt, and she goes in because they say it's just a usual thing. They just want her to come and clarify a few things, but later on she was taken into judicial custody. And because she was a journalist already, she knew these people, so they did give her a little bit of leverage, where they did allow someone to bring clothes for her. Otherwise, she would have been photographed in a pink t-shirt and yellow jeans. But later on, she was, if you see all the pictures, she's actually in a kurta and a salwar. So she enters judicial custody on the 9th of December of 2011. There are two female constables who strip search her the day she's taken into custody. And why do you think they strip search people when they sort of arrest people? What do you think that is?
I think it's because of contraband and all the kind of drugs that can be hidden in the crevices of the body.
Right. So, and apparently on this day, Jigna writes in her book that she had her period. So, and I think all of us can safely say, as women, it's already horrible when you're on your period, but if you get arrested on that day, that's even worse. And, you know, by the way, I found this really interesting as someone who has read Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre has this first chapter called The Red Room, and she enters a gate which is called Lal Gate on the day when she has a period. So there was a part of me which was smiling about that connection the entire time. So, um, all the identities that Jigna had before she entered in Baikula jail were, of course, stripped of her. She was just given a number, and that number was 1193. At one point, she was the person reporting all these crimes in a male dominated world, and now she was a criminal herself. So it was completely the other side. There was a whole different hierarchy inside the prison. For several logistical and other reasons, people are put in different cells, and those cells are basically according to what kind of crime people have committed. But she was in basically, think of the jail as something which has sort of circles inside of it, and she was basically in barrack number 6 of that circle. She was in circle 2. So circle 1 was dedicated to female prisoners. There are 2 circles. Depending on the crime that somebody had accused and the behavior that they had inside, they would be circulated from circle 1 to circle 2. So she goes into describing that, of course, I mean, all of us can imagine prisons are not the most beautiful places on the planet, right? And she goes on to describe that there were these stained walls and everything smelt of urine, and everything was constantly, it smelled damp all the time. So, of course, I mean, it was truly horrible. Jigna, every time she would see these women who were arrested, and they had little babies, so those babies were inside the prison with these women. And every time she would see one of those babies inside the prison, she was reminded of her 12-year-old son who was studying in Panchgani. Though this prison, by the way, the prison that she was in, Baikula, was just made in 2004, and the event take place in 2011. And even then, it seems like a completely dilapidated kind of terrible kind of place. She was housed in a tiny space which was meant for just a handful of women, but apparently there were 45 women in that small room, and there was a strict hierarchy inside the prison as well, where people were divided based on their religion, based on their caste, based on their financial might. However, she does go on to say that they used to celebrate all sorts of things inside the prison. There were many African women in the jail as well. Most of those women, she goes on and keeps telling us about a woman called Melody Mama, a woman who basically was like this African woman who might not have been that old, but that's what everybody called all the African prisoners, were all Mama, M-A-M-A, right? So, and these women were mostly arrested for contraband and drug sort of accusations. She goes on to tell us that dinner was served as early as 5:30 p.m. and then everyone was asleep by 10 because they had a head count again at 5 a.m. in the morning. The food was completely inedible. There was usually hair floating around in the dal, which, I mean, just sounds completely terrible. But that's what jail is. It's not the most pleasant place. So while Jigna was inside, she had many other famous inmates, prominent inmates along with her, like a woman called Maria Suzeraj, who was famously arrested because she conspired to kill her lover, Neeraj Grover, along with her fiance, the Navy officer called Jerome Matthew. So while she was there, there were other prominent figures as well, like a woman called Pragya Thakur. Now, do you remember anything about Pragya Thakur? So if you don't, that's okay. You don't have to remember because you don't have such a keen interest in true crime. I'm basically holding you hostage, making you listen to all this. So Pragya Thakur, by the way, was implicated in the Malegaon blast case, and she's supposed to be a right-wing kind of politician. And that's what she was arrested for. Another person who was, I mean, there were many famous people inside the jail with her. Another woman was Famida Ansari, who was facing the death penalty for her involvement in the 2003 Gateway of India bomb blast case. So apparently there were so many crimes going on in India that we don't even remember too many of. But I think in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s there were a lot of bomb blasts all the time, right? So we have so many examples of those people who were women who were in connection to that, they were arrested.
Okay, I wanted to ask you this earlier, but somehow I didn't. Was she even physically present at the crime scene?
No, she was not physically present at the crime scene. Interestingly, some people had actually seen the shooting happen. Jyotirmoy Dey on that day, was coming back after meeting his mother, and he was on the way back from his mother's house going towards his own house when he was ambushed and killed in the middle. He was apparently killed by someone. He had so many gunshots all over his body. He was apparently killed by two people on a motorcycle, and nobody said that there was a female on that motorcycle. So she was physically not the one who did it, but the police are alleging that she instigated this murder. And the interesting thing is that Jigna in her book writes that when he was actually killed, Jyotirmoy Dey, she was in Sikkim physically with her child and with the rest of her family, because this was sort of her time off. So she had gone on a mini vacation, and her editor sort of calls her up and tells her that Jyotirmoy Dey has been killed, and she submits a report. She submits a report, files a report for the newspaper, and she wrote an article about his death.
So she, before getting arrested, she never heard the transcripts herself ever?
No, no, because when the prosecution accuses you of something, they're supposed to hand in all the evidence. But apparently, because she was arrested under something which is called PCOOS, which is basically they're treating her like a terrorist threat. So usually somebody is arrested within 3 months. They should be there needs to be paper filed within the court. But do you remember, he was actually killed in June and she was arrested in November. So it was already a slightly longer period of time. And that's because when you're arrested under PCOOS, that's a terrorist threat apparently, and because of which the police can take longer to charge a to file a charge sheet. And the actual charge sheet against her was actually filed in February of 2012. The murder actually happened on June 11 of 2011, and she never actually heard any of these transcripts herself.
Okay.
But that's what the prosecution is alleging. And that's on the basis of which she was arrested.
Okay, one more thing. How long was she in the prison?
In total, she was inside the prison for 9 months in Baikula jail.
And of course, she must have retained the lawyers and attorney, whatever they are in legal
She
sense.
did. Yeah, two of them actually. Yeah.
Oh, two of them. And were they handed over the transcripts by the police at any point of time?
So there is something called discovery. When you file a case against someone, especially as the state, the prosecution, that's basically like the state of India against Jigna Vora, or the state of Maharashtra against Jigna Vora. Well, the law says that there is something called discovery, and whatever you find against that person, you're supposed to hand that over to the defense side. However, as we say in Hindi, kathni aur karni mein farak hota hai, right? So they're supposed to. And when I was reading her book, it did occur to me, it doesn't seem like she knew till the very end what they had. They just said that they were they had done a phone tap, and there were 36 transcripts of her conspiring to do all this. But apparently it was never handed over to the prosecution, to the defense. So she didn't know what the exact thing the police had against her, or the state had against her.
I'm sorry, there are so many things to know about this, but I should not hold you from telling us the story. So first, let's dive in and move ahead.
Okay, so I can actually completely sympathize with your disbelief, but that's how the judicial process works in India, unfortunately. So the interesting thing is that after the death of Jyotirmoy Dey, which was on June 11 of 2011, On July 1 of 2011, the television channel NDTV had an explosive interview with Chota Rajan, in which he claimed that Jyotirmoy Dey had with a rival gang of Dawood Ibrahim, and on his visit to London, Jyotirmoy Dey had invited Chota Rajan for an interview. But because Chota Rajan sensed that there was some sort of danger, he refused to give an interview to Jyotirmoy Dey. And Chota Rajan apparently, even during that NDTV interview, said, quote, reporters should not cross their limit, unquote. Right, so this makes us believe, of course, that he did have a hand in it.
Right.
It
Sounds
does seem like he was threatening and he was plotting to kill, Jyotirmoy Dey. But then I think the biggest question is, did the police ever have anything against Jigna Vora herself?
So let me get this straight. Was there any connection between Jigna and Chota Rajan? Was it proved? Like, how was she connected to Chota Rajan in the first place?
Right. So I'm glad you asked that question. The thing is that she's a journalist, and she was trying to get an interview with Chota Rajan. And to get that interview, she got in touch with a man called Paulson Joseph, who was a close connection of Chota Rajan. And then and she was trying to get this interview for her newspaper, which is called Asian Age, and even her editor Hussein Zaidi knew about this. So she wanted to get this interview because there was a shootout in a place called Pakmodia Street, and she knew, by some connection, she knew a person called Nishit, who knew this person called Paulson, and Paulson knew Chota Rajan. So she was actually trying to arrange an interview. And then one day she was actually driven to a place called Navi Mumbai, and she went to a famous restaurant in Navi Mumbai. She kept waiting there along with a person called Arif, who had driven her there. And then she thought that she's going to get an interview with Chota Rajan, but what ends up happening is Chota Rajan never shows up. And then while getting out of the car, Arif asks her, why don't you just give me your phone number, and whenever Chota Rajan has time, he will actually call you up. So Chota Rajan had her phone number, and apparently there was like a 10-second call or something that the police claimed that they had between her and Chota Rajan.
Okay, this case must have definitely affected her professional life. Did she ever get employed after her 9-month?
So she was in the jail for 9 months.
Yeah.
But the actual case dragged on for 7 years, believe it or not. She has never been employed as a journalist after that, although she was acquitted in this case. And out of like a 300-page judgment, there was only one paragraph in the whole judgment about Jigna Vora. Along with the 8 other accused, she was one of the accused. There's only one paragraph about her, and apparently in that one paragraph, there's only one line of importance which says that she's been acquitted in this case. Even then, she never got a job in any media house. She's never worked as a journalist after that. And I actually saw an interview of hers the other day, and she says that since then she's been supporting herself through astrology and tarot reading, and she got really interested in all that because she wanted to know what did she ever do to deserve all this, right? So see, that's how she's been supporting herself and her child, who by now, so in 2011 her child was 12 years old. So I mean, there's been 14 years since. So this child is now in his mid-20s.
Jigna stayed in jail for a total of 9 months, and then on August 11 of 2012, she was released on bail. Once she was released on bail, Jigna Vora was supposed to go to the crime branch once a month and mark her attendance. She was supposed to be in Mumbai only and was prohibited from going outside the city. Once she was released on bail, she heard the news from the outside world. After 27 years of being on the run, the mastermind of the Jyotirmoy Dey murder case, Chota Rajan, whose real name is Sadashiv Nikhalje, was arrested on October 25 of 2015. He was arrested in Indonesia after he had arrived from Australia. The Indian authorities seized him and put him in the Tihar jail in Delhi. Jigna goes into a lot of detail in her book However, I've shortened it here and I've told you everything that she went through in those 9 months. By this time, she had already gotten a bail, and now she started working on her case along with her defense counsel. So the case against Jigna Vora was built by the state on 36 damning transcripts and 3 eyewitnesses. The first witness was a man called Nikhil Dikshit, who claimed that Jay Dey, by the way, Jyotirmoy Dey, people used to call him Jay Dey, so that's why many times I end up calling him Jay Dey, and sometimes I call him Jyotirmoy Dey. So the first witness was, as I said, Nikhil Dikshit, and he claimed that Jay Dey himself had shown him a text message which he had received from Jigna Vora. The second witness was a man called R.S. Chandra, to whom Chota Rajan had allegedly said that Jigna Vora had emailed him. And the last witness was a man called Manoj Shivdasani, who apparently had spoken to the gangster Chota Rajan on the phone and claimed that when he was talking to Chota Rajan took Jigna Vora's name. All these witnesses had given statements to the police. However, one must remember that statements given to the police alone are not admissible in the Indian courts as evidence. The trial took a long time, and in the cross-examination by the defense counsel of the first witness, whose name was Nikhil Dikshit, this happened on May of 2017. Nikhil Dikshit said that the victim, Jyotirmoy Dey, had shown him a text message in which Jigna Vora, the accused, had sent him a text, and that text supposedly said, quote, "You think you're too smart or what?" unquote. But once he was in the court, Nikhil Dikshit changed this testimony, and he said that he actually did not see any texts, but he recalls that Jay Dey had told him that he had received a text of this nature from Jigna Vora. In the next hearing, the prosecution called the HR director of the Asian Age, which was the newspaper where Jigna Vora worked at the time of Jay Dey's murder. The prosecution wanted to prove that Jigna had taken time off to visit Sikkim without informing her HR. According to the prosecution, this showed that Jigna knew in advance that Jay Dey was going to be murdered, so she left town. Jigna Vora's defense team was able to show that this was actually the norm in Asian Age. In the newspaper where she worked at that point, all reporters simply informed their editors and their immediate bosses rather than informing the HR. As a matter of fact, Jigna Vora had informed her immediate boss, who was the renowned crime journalist Hussain Zaidi, and she had told him beforehand that she would be leaving town for Sikkim. Another witness which was used by the prosecution against Jigna Vora was a man called Manoj Shivdasani. His original statement was taken in front of the magistrate under section 164 of the CRPC. So his statement was actually admissible in the court, and the defense cross-examined him on May 23rd of 2017. This man, Manoj Shivdasani, admitted in court that he was friends with one of the co-accused in this case, though that particular co-accused had already died by the time it was 2017. Manoj Shivdasani admitted on the stand that he had given his statement in the Hindi language. However, the constable had written his entire statement in Marathi, a language that he himself was unfamiliar with, and then he was simply given that piece of paper which was written in Marathi, and Manoj Shivdasani signed it. The prosecution played a recording of a conversation between Manoj and Chota Rajan, and there was no mention at all of Jigna Vora. The last witness by the prosecution was a man called R.S. Chandra. On the stand, he said that Chota Rajan, the gangster who had masterminded the killing of Jyotirmoy Dey, had emailed pictures of Jyotirmoy Dey and his bike to Jigna Vora. It was not the other way around, like the police had made it sound in the charge sheet. So on May 2nd of 2018, Jigna Vora was acquitted of all charges in the murder of Jay Dey. The case had begun, if you remember, in the year 2011, and by the time it came to an end, it was 2018. In this whole time, Jigna's grandfather, her grandmother, and her own mother all had passed away. Her son's education had suffered, and she had lost her standing in society. Everyone looked at her as if she was a murderer. And what's worse, she never found any employment as a journalist. She had to make a living for herself by learning astrology, tarot, vastu. So, for all those who are wondering, why on earth was J. Day actually killed? J. Day, according to the confessions of Chota Rajan, who was the mastermind, was killed because Chota Rajan was simply irked by the fact that J. Day had written 2 articles against him, which were published in May and June of 2011. Chota Rajan also believed that J. Day was working with Daud Ibrahim, who was another competing Don who had a much larger presence all over Asia. So, I like to end all podcasts with some sort of a learning, some sort of a lesson. And if the state is against you, there's not much you can do about it. However, as a lawyer and as a professor, I would just simply tell you and anyone who's listening, always walk into the police station. If you've been called into the police station or anywhere, if the authorities ever speak to you, make sure that you have a lawyer present. We can give each other a lot more than just our thoughts and prayers. We can give each other our collective vigilance.